We are back, ladies and gentlemen, and we arrive on the back of 3 points earned at the ground that historically we don't do very well at. Mr. Brown, how is everything stateside, sir?
Everything is good, my man. I'm just not feeling the best today, but other than, of course, the result makes me feel a lot better. But I've a bit of a cold today. But delighted with the result, man. Delighted with where United are and how they responded to the very disappointing result in game against Leeds.
That's for sure. That's for sure. First and foremost, you're not well. Is this man flu? Are we talking about the dreaded man flu here?
Looks like I'm on my deathbed here, mate. This could be touch and go. I coughed twice this morning, and I don't know. It looks like another clean shirt would do me.
Well, look, you mentioned a game. Manchester United won, Chelsea nil, and a lot of stuff to unpack during that game. An eighth goal of the season for Matheus Cunha, 18th assist for Bruno Fernandes in the Premier League, his 19th, I believe, overall, and 3 points, as I said, at the ground that we last collected 3 points at when Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was manager. I mean, that's ridiculous when you think about that. But the ramifications of the game have left many conversations open and many debates embroiling all the way across social media. But before you get into the nitty gritty, when you consider that this was a team without its four first choice central defenders and a central midfield of 34-year-old Casemiro and a now 21-year-old Kobbie Mainoo going up against what is an elite central midfield, I don't quite understand why people are unhappy or complaining about this. Do you?
No. I mean, we're in an extremely privileged position where we're no longer debating about winning a game of football or winning three in a row or scoring away. We're not unhappy with the performances from a win. It's hard for me to when you're going to criticize someone, a significant part of the criticism is because there's such an obvious alternative that you should have done that this and you didn't choose it. It's hard for me to understand what else Carrick could have done, and it's hard for me to understand how good do you think these United players are to where you should expect that they should be that much better. Even the team against Leeds, 9 of that 11 picked itself. Right, the only two you're really talking about was Sesko and Mazraoui. The rest picked itself because he had no other options. Similar to Chelsea, I mean, he's going in there with one fit young centre back, the least senior of all the centre backs, and kid was sensational, by the way. And it's hard for me to understand how anyone can look at that and think that it is reasonable criticism. I can understand if we're still looking at this a year from now, and Carrick's been able to build out a squad, and we have fit players, and this is the result of Carrick's best 11. But no,
the biggest thing to take from it, if you sort of rewind back to when Ruben Amorim came to the football club, he arrived mid-season, had no pre-season, inherited somebody else's squad, didn't have time to implement his philosophy, his way of doing things. Forget about how it ended, but there was a general acceptance that when an individual arrives mid-season and they don't have time, things aren't going to be straightforward. Michael Carrick has inherited the exact same thing, but he's not necessarily privileged to have a plethora of top-tier quality across the field. And, the thing that I don't understand, I'm seeing messages come through to me on social media, and they could be 5 minutes before the final whistle, or they might come 30 seconds after the final whistle. And I couldn't believe it that even after getting 3 points at Stamford Bridge, literally within minutes, I was getting several individuals messaging me saying, great result, but not good enough. He's not going to last. He's got to go. He's not good enough. And you're thinking, I can understand narratives and I understand sensationalism for the sake of it. But this is an interim manager in his first real big job. I know he was in Middlesbrough in the Championship, but his first top-tier job. And that was his 12th fixture, Phil. He's won 8, he's drawn 2, he's lost 2. He has, as I said, a 34-year-old Casemiro who is approaching the twilight. He's well past the twilight of his career. And Kobbie Mainoo, who has just turned 21 years of age. I think so many people are bypassing the fact Casemiro, at his absolute pomp at Real Madrid, had Luka Modric and Toni Kroos ahead of him.
Mm.
Yet we now are expecting him to almost play the Toni Kroos role in this Manchester United midfield with a young player in Kobbie Mainoo, who is like, he's obviously a fantastic talent and he's the future of the football club. But right now he's still trying to learn his trade. Yet individuals expect this team to go out and marshal a midfield of Enzo Fernandez and Moises Caicedo. There's just no logic to it, is there?
Look, there are some people that always need a problem to justify their particular personality traits. Some people, negativity is catnip to them. And there always has to be a problem to justify certain personality characteristics, certain negativity, because it's just impossible for them to be. Wherever there isn't a problem, they'll invent one. And that's okay. For a lot of people, the problem's worth more than a solution. So you'll never get any positivity. United could win every game 10-0 and they'll find a problem. And so what is given that any airtime or given it any legitimacy is a mistake. We see some people's business model thrives off this too. It's not an honest appraisal of the game. This is done for an alternative purpose than honest analysis of the game. I don't think it should be given any credibility. Michael Carrick and Liam Senior got the job a week apart. Michael Carrick's success was not inevitable. This guy came in. I remember when the talk was Michael Carrick has to qualify for the Champions League, and I found that absurd. One, it was something that Ruben Amorim wasn't expected to deliver. The start of the season, the objective was to finish in the top 6, I think it was, right? Of course, at that time, nobody knew that 5th place would get you Champions League, possibly 6th. But it was back into Europe. Michael Carrick inherited a squad from a manager that finished in the bottom 5. That was during that time called the worst squad in Man United's history, although I didn't believe that. Nobody did. And a football club that was breaking records for all the wrong reasons. I mean, it was a football club you were watching out of duty, not out of love. And if you'd have said to me then, United would be sitting 10 points clear ahead of Chelsea at this stage of the season, and we have people complaining, I would just accept that no matter what you do, you're going to have that element. And the immediacy of sport and of social media, unfortunately, encourages this. And some people's entire model depends on this, and it attracts certain people with a certain personality. That's okay. I don't see how you can turn around and expect not only United to go to win at Chelsea, but to dominate them and play football that almost nobody's playing at the minute, Shaun.
No, absolutely. And obviously against the Chelsea squad, I mean, they have so many players brought into that squad. I could not list them to you. I like to pride myself that I know the majority of players of the majority of teams around Europe. I could not tell you.
Yeah, you kidnap half our team and they wouldn't know.
I mean, they have so much talent there. And I keep going back in the fact of all of the problems that they have at that football team. Midfield is not one of their problems because Enzo Fernandez, I don't maybe like the kind of petulant demeanor that he has, but he is one hell of a footballer. He's a footballer that I would love to have seen at Manchester United. Obviously, that'll never happen now. And, when you look at the game as a whole, and whatever you can say about attacking impetus or a lack of attacking impetus, obviously, the vast majority, pretty much everything positive that we had went through Bruno Fernandes, who is now, 3 assists in the Premier League away from breaking the record, 2 from tying it. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, it's almost you have to expect it at this stage because he's just so good. But a player that you touched upon already and deserves a massive, massive amount of plaudits is Aidan Heaven, because obviously at 19 years of age, coming in for his first start since January, the last time he actually started was against Burnley and that 2-2 draw back in January. And not only has he come into a central defensive lineup for his first start, he's come in beside Nazir Mazraoui. And we have somehow managed to come away from Stamford Bridge not only with a win, but with a clean sheet. And I know some people will go out of their way to say, oh, well, on another day, we could have conceded 1 or 2. Yeah, that's fine. As I say many times, if me handed ball, she'd be me uncle. And the fact of the matter is Manchester United went to Stamford Bridge. They collected 3 points. They collected a clean sheet. And 19-year-old Aidan Heaven had a hell of a lot to do about that, didn't he?
He did, and the very fact that United went into that game with that type of disadvantage was quite honestly a disgrace. I mean, not a disgrace, Shaun. The fact that they decided to ban Harry Maguire 3 days before Chelsea game, what information could they have been in possession of that they weren't in possession of after the Bournemouth game? United are preparing for this game against Chelsea, preparing and training. I don't know if Harry Maguire is going to play or not. Then decide it almost looks deliberate because it's hard to believe it's someone that incompetent. Oh well, you know what, we're going to extend it. And in light of what had happened at Leeds and everything, you would have thought that the English FA might have said, we're on the wrong end of some really bad decisions. That sending off, when you look at what else happened in that game, let's just go with the two. It's a bit, it's a bit ropey to do it right before 3 days before the Chelsea game. It's going to bring unwanted scrutiny onto the judicial process. Nobody's going to bat an eyelid if we go with two. Harry Maguire could have done what Alan Shearer did when he kicked Neil Lennon in the face and said, hey, I'm not going to play in the World Cup if you suspend me, and the English FA didn't, but he didn't do that. The Lisandro Martinez sending off in light of what we've seen this weekend is an utter disgrace. I mean, I know we all have confirmation bias. I know we all think our teams get robbed and we're on the wrong end of decisions more than anyone else. But I'm watching football this weekend, Shaun, and I'm watching games and I'm going, okay, I'm accounting for my confirmation bias, small sample size, I'm accounting for lots of other variables. I can't come up with a charitable explanation as to why referees are refereeing games clearly completely different than how they referee Manchester United. That is an undeniable, indisputable, incontrovertible fact. That was proven with the situation with Holland. That was proven with the situation with Bassi, where the same referee just a few days later decides that's not a punishable offense, but Lisandro Martinez is a clear red card. We're not even talking about different referees here. We're talking about the same referees. But according to football, there's some moral imperative why we can't ask professionals, because referees are professionals now. Just explain to me what you were thinking. Because if I'm left to fill in the blanks, I won't do it charitably. So the world's not going to end. Referees are not, you can't question any human being's integrity, respect that, but you can question the decision. That's fair. Why was that? Explain why that was a red card, why this wasn't. That's all I want. I want a grown man to tell me that. And I don't think the world will end if a referee answers that question.
The thing that's so frustrating about it is when the question is asked, you're basically given a copy and paste answer. It's, look at section B from Charter 2 in the third paragraph. We don't deem that there was necessary X, Y, and Z. Like, VAR was supposed to be brought in to alleviate all of the uncertainty that we have in the modern game. Like, I think that's a pretty fair assessment. That's a fair statement, is it not? And you see what happened with Lisandro Martinez and Dominic Calvert-Lewin. They had to go back to that to verify an observation and a statement that was made on the field. Now, anybody, let alone the video assistant referees, but anyone sitting down that was looking at Gabriel and Haaland's situation, as Haaland himself said afterwards, if he was to have gone down on the ground, then unquestionably it's a red card. So why do we need to have a situation where in order for Gabriel to receive his marching orders that day, we needed a player to pretend as if he was actually hurt to throw himself on the ground to vindicate the decision in the first place? That's not about individual preference. That's about cowardice. And it's about individuals who are empowered to make decisions at the highest level of Premier League football. And they're just cowarding away from it. Yet, it is fair in what you're saying, and whether or not you want to say it's about your personal bias towards the team. I can't help but feel if Casemiro, he's a prime example because he was the poster boy for this over the last couple of years. If you had replaced Gabriel and Casemiro on that particular day, how many games would Casemiro play another game for Manchester United this season, Phil?
Based on what we've seen in how Casemiro and other United players are officiated, we know that the probability that would have not resulted in a red card is almost zero. Look, the average age of a Premier League referee is 43. That means the majority of those referees grew up at a time when there was a pernicious, pervasive myth that United get all these decisions. And because, of course, fans are ruined by United always winning the league, by always being dominant. And amongst people our age, there's certain sense of justice when United are constantly robbed. So there's very little media pushback. Liverpool never experienced this. Liverpool had their period of domination, but that was pre-Sky, pre-football saturation, pre-internet. So they didn't produce the same impact on the national conscience. United, of course, their period of domination came at a time when there was saturation of football coverage. And I honestly believe, whether it's conscious or subconscious, referees know if I give a decision for Manchester United, it's going to result in a week of scrutiny and everyone's the football phone-ins and the prime minister is going to be asked. But if I give one against it, no one's going to say anything. So I don't know if it's a personal vendetta against United, if there's subconscious bias, or if it's just a natural human reaction to I don't want to get rinsed all week in the media. And there's two ways. This is where VAR brings in all the inconsistencies, because you can clearly see they're adjudicating decisions based on far more influential issues than just a decision. That's why we'll have all this inconsistency. There is no consequence. If a United player had got away with Gabriel, what Gabriel would have got away with, it would have been. Remember the Wolves game where Onana, where I think it was the first game of the season, United won 1-0.
When Onana came out to make the clearance.
Yeah. How long did we see that on TV for? Right? How long did we? This never happens to anyone else. So, of course, referees sitting there when they're looking at a VAR screen going, okay. I mean, there is simply no nuance. There is no way you can look at Calvin Bassey's, Herpool 3-4 days later and decide that it is not a red card today. There's no nuance. There's no subjectivity. It is an open and shut case, and there is no explanation that I can think of that justifies that. And to me, United need to make a bigger deal out of this, Shaun, because there is clearly something going on here.
Yeah, but this is something that you and I have been discussing for several weeks. And in fairness to him, Carrick is being very vocal about this. He's back to back. He's been very, very vocal about the level of situation and the nature of the decisions that are being made. He doesn't seem any way put out by doing so. And I think he's totally right. Yet he is being scrutinized for doing so. But even, Dermot Gallagher came out this morning and said that he thinks that it was a fair decision on the basis of all things considered with Gabriel and Haaland. And surely it's just notoriety and it's sensationalism for the sake of ensuring people continue to talk about this particular segment on Sky Sports. It can't be anything other than that.
But to me, you have to interrogate that answer. Why do you think that? Explain to me why. Why? Because I want to be informed on this. And maybe there's something we're all missing as fans, that we're being unfair to officials. Oh, I didn't think about that. I didn't think about that angle. So Dermot Gallagher's job isn't to support the decision, it's to explain the decision.
Mm-hmm.
If it's right, explain why it's right. If it's wrong, explain why it's wrong. Not just, I think it's right. That tells me nothing. Why do you think it's right? That's what you're there for. Not to turn around and I don't really care about your opinion. I care about why it's right or why it's wrong. What are the facts? And if everyone's unfairly commenting, because it's, there's a large consensus of the ridiculousness, even by people outside of United, of, Martinez being sent off and then decisions this weekend not resulting in any punishment whatsoever. That's where Dermot Gallagher has to do his job and come out and explain the decision, not whether he agrees or not with the verdict. No, you have to explain what happened here. Otherwise, that's a meaningless comment. I don't care whether you agree with it or not. I care why you agree with it.
Yeah, I do think it all stems back to preferential treatment. And rival supporters will always say that Manchester United fans will just turn around and they'll look to bemoan every single decision, that everything has gone against them, but then look at all the decisions that have gone in favour. If you just look at Gabriel alone, I mean, there's several instances over the last couple of years that I can think of. The very first one that comes to my head always, I can never get rid of the image of him basically rugby tackling Rasmus Højlund to the ground inside in the area. And Gabriel continuously gets away with this. You must remember, in the exact same game yesterday, did Gabriel not rip the t-shirt off of Haaland's back literally by pulling him? So at what point can you pull away from something and say, look, enough is enough? Remember a couple of weeks ago, I said I had come back from one of the games that I was covering and I happened to watch Arsenal on the television. And I told you I was disgusted by listening to the commentator applauding Gabriel having the dark arts and the knowledge to know when to go down under the slightest touch.
Yeah.
When we've got to a situation where thievery is being applauded in front of our eyes, at what point then are you getting into the whole conversation about the example that you're setting for the younger game coming through? If all of the kids in the academy are looking at this and saying, okay, well, look, we can get away with this, then what then is the future of the game there forward?
Well, you're providing an incentive for play acting. You're providing it because players are faced with a very simple choice. If I stay on my feet, I'm going to provide an advantage to the opposition. If I, don't embellish things or, behave a certain, and of course, as we all know, we never apply the law perfectly or our opinions perfectly. We always provide, certain certain exculpations to players that we'll let this guy away with this and this guy not, and we don't treat people fairly. I understand that, but when I look at the way these things are being refereed, Shaun, you need only look at the way United get refereed in Europe. Very few of these things ever happen, right? I mean, United have been on a wrong end of some bad decisions in Europe, but there are 2 or 3 over the course of a decade. Right? In England, it's totally different. And I watch football. I'm watching games every weekend and going, that game is being refereed with a different set of rules and a different set of tolerance than the games I'm watching with Manchester United. And we hear, what about the decisions that go forward? Where are they? Oh, they even out over the course of a season. Well, if they do, there's going to be a national emergency because the next couple of games, United are going to get consecutive decisions that are key, that decide the outcome of games, and otherwise they don't even out over the course of a season.
Yeah, and when you got Liverpool coming up in 2 weeks at Old Trafford, you can almost be certain that's going to be a highly charged encounter. There's going to be a lot of very, very fiery tackles going in that day. And it'll be interesting to see if the same level of composure is held by the officials in it, because I'm willing to wager right now we will not see that. But look, we're speaking about the officials far too long, not just today, but every bloody week on this podcast. And I'm sick of it. We shouldn't even know their names. And yet we sit down and we speak about them for 15 or 20 minutes. The game itself, I know a lot of it was on the back foot. A lot of it was, backs to the wall, really, really good defensive. But one thing that did stand out to me, and I think it's important that we actually reference this as well, it was probably one of the more mature performances that we've seen from Kobbie Mainoo in midfield. He looked very disciplined in his defensive. Like, he knew right from the outset his instructions. He knew what his role was for the day. And he didn't seem phased. There was a couple of times where a challenge went askew or Enzo or Caicedo got the better of him, but he just kept on. He didn't drop his head in any way, shape, or form. I thought he was disciplined. I thought he was very well rigid throughout the entire game. And I think that has set a platform for what is to come next season when we get the correct midfield investment in the summer, because that to me was a performance from a guy who's now 21, but it looked like a guy who's 25, 26 years of age, Phil.
United can't win a game unless their midfielders are on top form.
Yeah.
Because they don't have an alternative on the bench to go to. That if one of them isn't playing well, they can come in, the levels will be maintained or they'll be increased. Excuse me. If they're not playing well, the midfielders aren't playing well, United can't win. And you see the difference against Leeds between having Mainoo and not having him. I think if Mainoo plays against Leeds, we're talking about a completely different outcome. And all due respect to Manuel Ugarte, but the contrast is just enormous. between him playing and not playing. It was important United to have Manu on the pitch against Chelsea. And against the midfield, it's a couple of £100 million midfield. I mean, Moises Caicedo, Enzo Fernandez are about, what, 250 million between them. Enzo Fernandez is a World Cup winner. And I would, if I had to pick a midfielder out of all of them that were on the pitch against Chelsea, and I could only pick one, I'd have picked Kobbie Mainoo. Casemiro giving 110%, making investments of which the dividends he will never see. He's not going to be here next season, but he's playing like he has a moral obligation and duty to get United into the Champions League. Just contrast that with some of the stuff we've seen before. I mean, Chelsea looked like United used to look like, right? A collection of footballers that have no identity, that sign for the team, not the club, that don't care about the club, only care about the short-term objectives of the team.
Mercenaries.
Aren't going to fight for the club, fight for a pride, be embarrassed that fans paid hundreds of pounds to. They're already, you can already see that they're, on the pitch with a text on their agent, get me out of here. Chelsea, I've got these lads on 8-year contracts. So where's the incentive? Where's the consequence? Where's the fear? Whereas there's, I don't know. I mean, to me, I look at it and go, that's a football club in serious, serious trouble because they don't have a lot of room for maneuver with these contracts. They're locked into a situation that's clearly perpetuating this. They didn't look like they really wanted to win. And United have had some horrendous times at Stamford Bridge on the 4-3. I'll never forget, we're conceding 2 goals in injury time, a game that United should have won. We've seen that happen. I'm thinking that again at the weekend. I'm like, please don't have a repeat. And yeah, inevitably United rode their luck once or twice with Liam Delap. But for the most part, they were in control, and they weren't completely dominating the game, but they never looked like under any real serious threat. And if you'd have said United will take 3 points out of Chelsea away and Leeds at home, we'd have thought it would have been the reverse. But the way United and Carrick have responded to their 2 defeats is very, very encouraging. The way they responded to Newcastle, the way they responded to Leeds, they've come back with wins after those games, and very, very encouraging.
Very encouraging. And we got now, what, five games remaining, yes? And Chelsea play Brighton next, unless I'm incorrect. I believe Chelsea are playing Brighton tomorrow. And Chelsea have to go to Brighton. Every possibility Brighton beat them. So we could be in a situation heading into Brentford next Monday, where Brentford come to Old Trafford. The Champions League qualification could be sewn up there and then. Yet, the thing that I think we need to touch on before we move on to all that, it's sort of laying back on what I said at the start about all of the conversations about a lack of tactical acumen and the criticism that's been waved on top of Carrick, namely coming for some very heavily followed social superstars per se. Rio Ferdinand even got involved in responding to one of them yesterday. And that can maybe lay into something that Andre Stokes wanted to reference to us on Twitter. And he wanted to get our opinion on Gary Neville's media conglomerate coming in and purchasing Mark Goldbridge and all of the ramifications that that's going to have thereafter. Before we get into it, what was your initial fallout when you gained reference that Goldbridge had received that amount of money and joined forces with a man who previously said he was going to do absolutely nothing with him?
Look, United fed that beast. They rewarded that level of coverage, that type of coverage. Their attitude was, he does numbers. Okay, well, porn does numbers, right? That doesn't mean that you start putting players on Pornhub, right? Because it does numbers. I mean, that to me is a ridiculous justification. The United once described them to me as Fox News. Right, everyone hates Fox News, but you still have to work with them. I don't understand that. That to me doesn't work. He's a toxic individual that thrives off negativity. That's the whole business model. He understands algorithms. He understands enragement drives engagement. He builds a platform without any conscience of the consequences of that. The aggregate of all, his abuse towards players. Very targeted, very specific. This is an individual I once brought on my podcast out of empathy because he was being targeted and being bullied, I felt. And I thought it was important to say, look, I don't agree with anything this guy says, but he's a human being, and the accumulation of all that abuse is something I would be concerned about. But then he extended none of that empathy to anyone else. To me, what type of example does that send to young people wanting to do this? Be a toxic piece of shit, and it'll get rewarded. If you want to do legitimate, responsible journalism, nobody cares about that anymore, because that doesn't get rewarded. That's slow growth. But there's a difference between being entertained and being informed. That's entertainment, right? You can grow numbers, but you have no influence over your audience, because no one takes anything you say seriously, right? Then there's someone with 1/10 of the followers who's informing, that has enormous influence over their audience because they trust what they're saying. That's where the value is to me. That's where the influencer is to me. I don't understand why anyone would want their name attached to that shit.
No, I'd agree. It always brings me back. I've never brought Goldbridge on any of my platforms, but obviously, yourself with what I do on a 9 to 5 basis. I speak with most of the biggest names in English journalism on a weekly basis. I speak with most of them on my podcast on a weekly basis. I'm not going to give any names about this, but I remember well over a year ago, I spoke with a very, very respected individual who had shared a conversation with Mr. Goldbridge. And the one thing that stood out to him the most when he had a conversation was that everything that came back was almost dismissing the fact that he was providing news, that he was a modern day journalist, because in no way, shape, or form was that being adhered to over on that YouTube platform. It wasn't an omission that he was being classing himself as news. He wasn't classing himself as a modern day journalist. He was classing himself as entertainment. So everything that you're stating about it, this is something that's obviously being embraced. There's no desire for integrity, because that's the only thing that I've ever attempted to do since I've got into journalism, is I've just attempted to remain honest, to not come up with any fabricated information for the basis of clicks or for a non-organic growth, because I find that all you actually get in that particular scenario is you pick up a juvenile audience that don't really understand the nature of the message that's trying to get across. So that's why it makes it even a little bit more difficult for me to comprehend, a little bit harder for me to stomach, because it's something that you've referenced in the last couple of weeks, that Manchester United are truly lacking a former player to come out and have, we'll say, the style of Jamie Carragher, for example, who is very much, I am Liverpool, I will defend Liverpool. We don't have that. We have individuals that are trying so hard to be neutral that it seems like they're being anti-Manchester United. And then you're adding this, it's not about targeting him individually, because I don't know the guy individually. But what he is selling and what he's putting out there is about his damaging for the football club. And it goes hand in hand with what I was saying a moment ago. When you're seeing the academy players who are looking at professional footballers getting away with cheating, you're setting an example for the next generation of football fan, that it's okay to set negative standards. It's okay to push sensationalism. Notoriety sells. And these footballers are earning enough money, so they should be able to take all the abuse in the world and just get on with it. And to me, there's no place for it in this world. I can't stand it.
What I don't understand about it, Shaun, United have been on to me many times in the past about, you need to correct this one sentence or this one statement, or, held me to a very high standard of, informed journalism or informed commentary and making sure it was correct, right? I don't understand why they don't do that with this lot, right? I don't understand. He's reported on stories where I've shown him how wrong he is, because I felt he's interested in what's right, not who's right, and he refused to correct. So I'm like, okay, he's playing a bit, right? He knows this is wrong, but that he's not interested in what's right. He's interested in downloads, click the language of advertisement media, and it's done for a very specific intent. And imagine your employer, Shaun, has a working relationship with someone whose entire business model is abusing you. How does that foster good relationships with your employer? How? I mean, I would hate my employer. And I know for a fact there are players that despise him. And there are very real granular effects, that take place as a result of that. I don't understand it. Like, United can't stop people doing this, but they can choose who they work with and who they reward. Other clubs don't do this, And to me, I just you'll notice a lot of his exclusives have disappeared since certain people have left the club. But it's yeah. I mean, if you're a young person out there, you're listening to this, don't use that as an example, because journalism, good journalism, is not sexy. Maybe you put your life, your enormous amount of work into a piece that gets 1,000 views and he gets 1,000,000 views, or anyone else on some worthless football commentary or transfer rumor. That's okay, because it's more important to be to responsibly inform than that shit, right? Because that provides no benefit to anyone. And I don't want to see more people chasing that business model. I mean, I don't know how you sleep at night when you see the very real life impact of things and how they impact people and their families, and think that's justifiable because there's a financial aspect to it. But whatever. I mean, this exists, and this is what the internet and social media rewards.
Yeah, but this even hits a little bit closer home to you, given the relationship that you have with Marcus Rashford and his family. Because we've seen such a tailored agenda and a narrative displayed there. And, both of us have a different side of the spectrum on this, because you have well publicized relationships with these people, whereas I have spent years working with individuals in Spain. So I have so many colleagues and friends in Spain and journalists in Spain that between the two of us, we pretty much have a full circle of Marcus going to Barcelona. But when you see the ramifications of what has been and gone in the past, it makes it even more suspect that something like this is allowed through the club, like you're saying. And one of the questions that got sent through this week from Anthony on Twitter, it really dives into it, because he says, the Glazers sunk us in debt, destroyed Old Trafford, and we haven't been near a title challenge in over a decade. What serious hope do you have that things will ever improve while they remain majority control? Because I cannot see a way out of this. And when you're seeing relationships and partnerships like this forming off the field that we're just discussing, it does set a very bleak tone, doesn't it?
Well, this is the problem. The Glazers' definition of success is very different than Jim Ratcliffe's definition of success. And the Glazers don't really care about winning trophies. They care about revenue streams. So their target has always been just getting the Champions League. And once we get into a place where we're third, it's going to cost 300 million to win the league next year. That's what we think. But 100 million to keep us in the Champions League, where you're getting 100 million, because that's all they care about. They have no emotional attachment or nourishment from winning trophies. These are people that just define success on a profit and loss column, not a win loss. When profit's first principle, everything's a casualty to that, and that's exactly what we see at Manchester United, where success can be obtained without compromise and profit. We'll take it. But not where compromise is profit. And so this is where, at the very top of any business, there has to be complete consensus on the goal. There has to be complete agreement. This is how we define success, right? And then you calibrate your incentive programs based on achieving that success. And if not, it's directionless. And you'll get some of those answers this summer about what is the objective. Is it to qualify for the Champions League next year, or is it to win the league? I don't think this type of disharmony is sustainable. I think eventually one has to give way to the other. And billionaires and their egos, they tend not to want to share businesses and plutocrats play things. They tend not to want to share it. Now, we are in a situation where globally, it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen the next few months because the global economy is in a mess. We have global instability. We have certain things going on socially, economically that are novel, that are brand new, and making confident extrapolations about the future based on the past is a mug's game now. Petrochemical industry is getting hit very hard. And the Glazers might be wealthy on paper, but they're not cash rich. And you see what's going on at Newcastle. The Saudi PIF could very easily sell Newcastle. They're withdrawing all their investments, and there's a lot of people seriously thinking about where they're putting their money. Global commodities, everything is. There is just so many variables, so many causal variables that are massive, that are going to have a major impact on economies. If you look at the prediction for the UK economy, are people going to be able to afford, 3-figure ticket prices a year from now? We just don't know. And I think that when you have that much leverage, that's not a good position to be in whenever you require the leniency of banks and what have you. You need to refinance it. There's a lot of very scary variables coming up, and will Jim Ratcliffe even have the money to go out and complete that purchase? Who knows, Shaun?
That is a very big, comprehensive, and uncertain answer. And that is the truth. It's the easiest way to say it. I'm glad that you referenced this summer, because I was working through Red News there over the last couple of days with the guys. And that is one of the fundamental pieces that I said about this summer, because we will truly get a little peek as to what the actual ambitions for this football club are. I think it's safe to say, and this is probably something you can agree with, most people can, the transfer business under this New Look Sporting hierarchy has been far more promising than anything we could have hoped for. We've seen very good acquisitions in terms of first team and in terms of youth team players. What I want to see this summer, and really touching on what Anthony said, is there any way looking forward? Is there anything that we can get hopeful in this? If they continue to put their money where their mouth is, and they can continue on this platform with positive transfer and positive recruitment philosophy, then ultimately we will get into a situation where if we continue to recruit the right players, ultimately success surely will follow. It doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to win, but you will at least be competitive. And when was the last time that we could actually say that Manchester United were competitive on a perennial basis? It's been years and years. So if we continue on the platform whereby recruitment is tailored and we have proper calculated acquisitions to this football club, then that is the best platform for success that we can possibly hope for, is it not?
Yeah, and I think environment has a lot to do with that. One of the things that it's very encouraging is players that Ineos signed really wanted to play for United.
Yeah.
We weren't convincing them by giving them money that they weren't going to get elsewhere, right? Players are taking pay cuts to stay at the club, Maguire. Players want to be there. And so anyone that's coming into this summer is coming into the best version of Manchester United probably since Solskjaer finished second, right? And they got their recruitment wrong that summer. And we're still seeing the consequences in some ways of that. I think, to be fair, Ineos are very measured. Aidan Heaven, they don't get a lot of credit for that, but they should. Was saying that last January with Dorgu, of course, before. And most of the 10 million United band players, they have to be replaced a year later. None of the players United have signed have to be replaced. So very, very encouraging. And you genuinely feel like we're getting solutions to problems for the next few years. So United in the Champions League are a very attractive prospect. And, just to go back to the previous answer, I said, how does this affect Man City? Because the UAE, are having their own problems. How does that affect their ability to fund City? There's just so many unknowns going forward that it's going to be really, really interesting. I think, with the Elliot Anderson stuff, it's not locked in that he goes to Man City. I think that will very much depend on what Pep Guardiola does next season. And I don't think Pep Guardiola right now in this moment in time wants to give an answer, which suggests to me that he probably wants to leave. If City don't win the league, he might do what Ferguson did when United lost the league on the last day to City, is stay one more year so that he goes out on a high and winning the league. If they do, it's very possible that this will be his last season. So I think United have to bring in players that want to be at the football club, that are right mentally, that your personality and characteristics are cohesive with what United are trying to build, and they have an environment that allows players to thrive. Of course, they have to decide very, very soon on what they're going to do with the managerial situation.
Well, that's it. And, just to add a little bit on what you're saying about Elliot Anderson, if you and I are aware of this situation with Pep Guardiola and the likelihood of what's going to happen, Elliot Anderson and his representatives are going to be
Oh, sure.
more than aware of what's going on. So I would totally support the point of principle in that you're making, and that I would not think it's a foregone conclusion with him yet in any way, shape, or form. He still remains the priority, and United have every reason to believe they have a great
Yeah.
opportunity to bring him to the football club. And also what you're saying with the financial issues that are going on, particularly with Newcastle, all you have to do is look at Live Golf. Live Golf looks like it's
Yeah.
going to lose all its funding, I mean, the fallout from that is going to be absolutely catastrophic. But you're mentioning managers, and there was another question came through on Twitter from an account called C Rock, and he said, if Carrick gets the job, how do we know that he won't implement the current pragmatic style of play, or do the board go for a sure attacking coach? Now, I do think that falls back on what we were speaking about already. Having this ideal that he's looking to just play a simple, pragmatic style of football, I think I'm not being in any way smart in saying this now, I don't mean to come across as insulting, but I think it's slightly narrow-minded to think that he's just playing a certain way because it's the only way he's able to play. I think there is massive limitations at his disposal right now, and he's doing the very best he can with the options that he has. I listened to Rio Ferdinand speaking back to Mark Olbridge there yesterday or the day before. I can't remember. My days are just rolling into one another now. But he made a very good point, and he's right. He said that there's so much talk about a lack of tactical or proactive acumen that's there. Yet, even though we lost the game against Leeds, it is fair to say there was two different performances from the first half to the second half. So it showed that they went in at the break. Whatever was said to them between Michael Carrick and Steve Holland clearly worked, because even though we were down to 10 men, on another day, it's highly possible United could have won that game, because that was a totally different performance in the second half. So that in itself stands to reason that Carrick and Holland, because everybody keeps just mentioning Carrick. Steve Holland is an integral part of this coaching team as well. And I think a lot of people are really sleeping on this, and they're not giving them enough credit. I think that there's just it's almost like what we're saying, Phil, in that these narratives that get into social media, be it on YouTube or across any of the platforms like Twitter, that they start to stick. You fire enough of shit at the wall, and eventually some of it will actually stay there, won't it?
I just want to know what their expectation is that should have happened based on what he has. I mean, what way should he be playing? And what should we expect from these players that you are not getting? Should they all of a sudden start playing, Guardiola tiki taka and just walk? I mean, this is not consistent with reality.
No.
And it's I want to see the best football possible. I just can't understand when I look at what Carrick has at his disposal. When my brain fires, I don't come up with disappointment. Say, well, it's Carrick's fault. We're not getting this or getting this or getting this. Do you know what I mean? What is it that you expect from these players? They're not a champion. That's a top 6 squad when everyone's fit. That's it.
And a top 6 squad that was basically closer to the finishing line of being a Ruben Amorim squad rather than an actual 4-2-3-1 or a 4-3-3.
It's just, I can't understand what the counterfactual is. This is what we have a reasonable expectation to expect. And as a result of Michael Carrick being there, this is why we're not getting it. I don't live in that world, Shaun.
No.
I don't think there's anything much more Michael Carrick could do. And the way I feel watching United now is completely different to how I felt watching them under Amorim. I'm enjoying watching United. They're playing against a team that have spent what, $1 billion. He hasn't signed a single fucking player, and you have an expectation. Do you understand what football management is? It's about managing people. How players go out and apply themselves is beyond the manager's purview. Really, I can't motivate anybody. That's your job as an athlete. How you execute, that's your job as an athlete. I can't even manage myself. But this is true. We can't even manage ourselves, and we're expecting this guy to manage 22 other individuals and every decision they make. I mean, it's fucking ridiculous. When has that ever happened? You know, you can prepare players, but 99%, you know, whenever a player scores a hat trick, I've yet to hear one of them turn around and say, yeah, I owe all of that to the manager. If the manager had to tell me exactly where to be, how to finish, how to score, none of this stuff would have happened. But when they lose, it's all his fault. Mm-hmm. I mean, what shit? What I know as human beings, we like to create boogeyman, and you're to blame. This to me is juvenile nonsense. Now, anyone that's ever worked in a business will know that I don't care. A manager cannot overcome incompetence in other areas, right? Now, a bad manager, you can have competent departments, and a bad manager can't be the difference between you succeeding and failing, right? But if your other departments that contribute now to success, which are massively influential now, if they aren't operating at peak levels, no manager can save you. It's not always a manager's fault why a business is underperforming. And you apply that to any other business, and it makes sense.
I know. And I think, the likes of Football Manager has an awful lot to blame for this.
Yes.
And I know that might seem like a flippant comment, but somebody can sit down on their computer for a couple of weeks and take Hereford from the conference to the Champions League, and all of a sudden they have enough tactical proficiency to be able to explain what's going wrong at the very elite clubs in Premier League. And it's just nonsensical. But, all things said and everything that we've discussed, it does lie. Obviously, the result of Chelsea's trip to Brighton is going to be huge, because next up we have Brentford at home Monday. I believe we're playing Monday evening. We're playing, and should Chelsea lose to Brighton, we have an opportunity, as I said, to sort up there and then, or not. Well, like, I'm not sure to throw myself off there with Brighton and Brentford, but I know Brentford coming to Old Trafford, they're now the draw masters. I think they've drawn 5 games in a row. But there's every opportunity for United to really take this by the scruff of the neck. And I can't help but feel, if this squad is as harmonious as we are led to believe it is, because that is one thing, basically, even all you have to do is look at Lisandro Martinez's public comments about how everybody is working towards achieving the results from Michael Carrick, then I cannot see anything other than this team just racing out from the opening whistle and trying to put that game to bed as early as they possibly can on Monday, Phil.
I just can't see Chelsea having the consistency to catch United no matter what to do. Hopefully, United players from this weekend have taken a bit of a siege mentality and feel like the whole world's against them, and go out and prove a point to the officials and feel that. And hopefully they use it to galvanize them. But United are going to qualify for the Champions League, Shaun, right? If United needed to, 6 to 9 points out of their last few games to catch someone to get into the Champions League, I would be less convinced. It's not that United are convincing me, it's that Chelsea are convincing me. They won't have the consistency, or anyone else in that vicinity, to catch United, I think, over the next 3 or 4 games. How many's left? 5 games?
5 games, yeah.
Yeah, I think over the next 5 games, United will have better consistency than the other team. I think they get decided away to Chelsea, and I'm quite confident United will get them.
Yeah, well, like as I said, I share the lack of confidence in Chelsea. That's why I'm saying I think Brighton can get the job done against them tomorrow evening, and I think Brighton will get the job done against them tomorrow evening. There's one question I have to ask you because I'm curious about this. Really quick one. Harry Maguire is going to be back from suspension. He's likely going to go straight into central defence.
Yeah.
Lenny Yoro's little injury that he picked up was supposed to be minor. In all likelihood, he's going to be available to return back. Would you put Lenny Yoro in beside Harry Maguire, or would you keep Aidan Heaven in there?
I'll keep Aidan Heaven in there. I think the kid deserves to start. I mean, if you can't reward him with another starting performance after that, I'd be disheartened if I was him. Because he's going to be important, Shaun. You need centre backs next season. And if you can come in and put in that type of performance away to Chelsea, right, then I think that one is very encouraging and very promising for the present, but also for the future. I think he has to start. I think he also is in better form than Euro. And I really rate Lenny Euro. I do. But to me, he has to start with Maguire.
I would agree with that. And on that crucial point, which bodes very well for the future, we should bid you all a good day, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for taking the time, for sending your feedback, your questions, all the kind comments across social media and via email. It's fantastic to read. We do love it. And at least you can see we're doing our best to get to as many of the questions as we possibly can. Keep them coming over all social media. And if you want to email them, send them to editor@theatre-of-red.com. If you're not already liked and subscribed, please do so. And feel free to leave any sort of a feedback. We'll try to get back to as much of it as we possibly can. And we will be back to you bright and early next week with what will hopefully be a very happy time for Manchester United.
Yes, folks, thank you all for tuning in. Much appreciated. Thanks for all your feedback. Shaun, all the best, mate.
Take care, buddy.
Cheers, pal.